something came up in a conversation we were having, and I thought it would be very intriguing and also cute in a way. We're calling it the Yiddish Personality Series. Yiddish is a very interesting language. It's actually my first language, Yiddish. I just was reading the Wall Street Journal, had an article that there's a website that deals with, I think, translations. So when they translate to French, they show the French flag. German flag, Russian flag. Every country has its flag. When it comes to translating to Yiddish, what flag? Yiddish doesn't have a flag because Yiddish-speaking people come from all over the world. It was never localized geographically. Yes, it was born Yiddish in Central Europe, so it has a certain German roots, or some say German is rooted in Yiddish. I was once in my community, they have a tour guide who brings people around. Many times German tourists come. So he knows that I speak Yiddish, so he asked me if I'd say a few words. I said, I don't speak German. He said, speak Yiddish. So I told the German tourists, I said, hey, I'm going to share with you something in the language that is the source and root of your language. They all laughed, a good laugh. So Yiddish is not localized. So there's no flag. But it's a very powerful language because it captures, it's almost like, I remember when someone telling me about jazz. I said, what's the power of jazz music? The first time I heard it, didn't make sense to me. They says the music of the streets. Its genesis, it was born in the anguish and the challenges of the streets. So it's not an organized music in the sense where very structured, and which is good for a novel and an act of fiction. But real life sounds more like jazz. Yiddish sounds more like real life. The expressions were born, many of them, in the anguish and the joys of real life that the Jewish people were going throughout their history. So words like oy vey, chutzpah, and others have become part of the vernacular, and they capture something that's quite difficult to capture in any other language. So we thought we'll do this Yiddish Personality Series, and we're going to begin with how to deal with the Shlemiel, Shlemazel, and the Nudnik. 3 Yiddish words, Shlemiel, Shlemazel, and Nudnik. And there's a classic joke that goes with it, which I'll begin with in a moment, but I want to just say a few more words about Yiddish. So though it's the Yiddish language, and we're not learning Yiddish here, but I think it can reflect, it can illuminate certain dimensions of human personalities that we don't always have the words for, but once you get it, you say, that's exactly that person. And I'm not trying to stereotype, and we're definitely not trying to in any way put anyone down or criticize. There's the classic stereotypes of the yente, of the yachne. We'll get into it in the other parts of this series. And hopefully it goes well. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And at the end of the day, though it has a certain humorous light side to it, it's really about insights into the human condition. That's really what it comes down to. So let's begin with how to deal with the Shlemiel, Shlemazel, and the Nudnik. 3 characters. The joke goes like this. The Shlemiel spills soup on the Shlemazel's lap, and the Nudnik is tugging and asking, what kind of soup was it? So right there you have an example, but it's very hard to describe Shlemiel. I mean, the joys of Yiddish, Leo Rasta and others have tried to, and they did a pretty good job. But it's very hard to describe it in a translation because it really was born from life experiences. So the best way to express it is by giving us a life experience. And here's one. The Shlemiel's the guy that's always like clumsy, and he's taking the soup, and it spills. The Shlemazel is always the one that's on the end, the victim, so to speak. Shlemazel. If you remember, there was a game called Chutzpah. It was featured. It was based on Monopoly, but the Yiddish version. And they had the cards. There's like chance, community chess. There it was. I forgot what the names of the cards were, but they had all these interesting expressions. That what they say there, that a Shlemazel is someone who falls on his back and breaks his nose. So he's always this loser, the Shlemazel. The Shlemiel is the one that is always the clumsy one. Again, it's not a pure definition. It's just a certain element of it. There's a lot more to a Shlemiel and to a Shlemazel. And the Nudnik, best way to capture it. What's a Nudnik? A nudge. Especially about things that don't matter. The soup has been spilled. Why does he need to know what type of soup was it? Was it chicken soup? was minestrone, was another type of soup. It just makes me laugh because there's such people that are asking questions that maybe, I remember there's a website, I think it's called uselessknowledge.com. It's very interesting stuff, but it's not really relevant. So there you have the joke. So in our lives, we may be one of these three people. I don't want to disparage anybody again, and it's not the goal at all of this program. We're not here to look to find somebody to identify. It's really personality, archetypes. Look at it as archetypes. And we all have the Shlemiel within us, and the Shlemazel within us, and the Nudnik within us. And it's good to look at it. Sometimes good to laugh at yourself, laugh at a certain type of feature. So let's talk about it a bit, the Shlemiel. Now, is the Shlemiel predestined to be clumsy? Or is just the guy that, like they say, has two left hands and is just unable to keep certain composure? Shlemiel is Shlemiel. You don't want to give certain jobs to a Shlemiel. He's always going to come back with something wrong. The Shlemazel, on the other hand, as I said, is like the quintessential victim. Something is always spilling on him. Something is always... And then there's the Nudnik. So we take one at a time. The Shlemiel, when you go a little deeper into it, is this. Look, we're all human beings. I remember Seinfeld, of course, though there's not too much Yiddish in it, but it's very much Yiddish in its spirit. So you have the Shlemiel in that show, whether it's George or whoever it may be, and I'm not really, again, limiting it, but just to give an example, the Shlemiel is the person that seemingly cannot get his act together. And is this due to be predestined? Well, we don't believe in karma and predestiny in that sense of the word, but there are behaviors like that. Like, for example, you give me to go try to cook a gourmet meal, I'm going to be pretty much like a Shlemiel. So it's not the guy to pick me out. Is that because of laziness, or I don't have interest, or whatever it may be, or I rely on others, or I'm spoiled? I'm not sure. But there's certain things that we all have a Shlemiel thing. You know, try to give someone who's not good with their hands to try build something very intricate. So Shlemiel is not necessarily in all areas. It could be certain areas that we're just not good at. And in that context, what do? Maybe focus on other areas where you're far better. There are people in one area, they'll be a Shlemiel, in another area, they'll be experts. They'll be, what's the Yiddish word for it? They'll be, gerotten is a word for talent. I'm looking for the opposite of Shlemiel. I didn't think about it. What would be the opposite of a Shlemiel? Would be, there's another word for Shlemiel, like lo yutzlachnik, which is really more Hebrew Yiddish, which means he's a Shlemiel. It's always like, he's not able to be successful. You could also use that on Shlemazel, but let's use it on Shlemiel. So Shlemiel is just that character that, you say, okay, let the Shlemiel come. Bring the Shlemiel over. In many of the stereotypical, critical scenes in Yiddish comedy, or sometimes real life, the mother-in-law is very sharp, will say, look at the Shlemiel, my son-in-law, the Shlemiel. Look at my son, the Shlemiel, some mothers will say. Shlemiel is like, it's an endearing word, but it has a certain element of dismissal, but it's not really malicious usually, unless the person is malicious. It's more of like, you know what, don't rely on him, he's a Shlemiel. Anyway, so Shlemiel is that type of thing. Now, as human beings, we have to always be sensitive, because we can be laughing at this word, but there are people I know that have been hurt. They've been bullied because they were called Shlemiels. So I want to make sure I'm qualifying. I'm talking, obviously, the lighter side and trying to discuss in a way that doesn't hurt anybody. But we have to be careful when we just call somebody a Shlemiel. That needs to be said. But at the same time, it is a character. Some people will claim in Yiddish sometimes in English, another word for Shlemiel would be nebish, a nebish type of individual. And these are people that I believe also challenge us to be kinder to. Because if you do see someone in that situation, you should also have some compassion and empathy. Because sometimes people just have that. They have that clumsiness, whatever it may be. And we never should judge anybody. On the humorous side, yeah, if you say about yourself, I'm pretty much a Shlemiel when it comes to these matters. Okay, let's move now to Shlemazel. Now, Shlemazel. Shlemazel probably comes from the word mazel, shaloi mazel. He doesn't have mazel, doesn't have success. That's why I said maybe the loser type, lo yutzlachnik, maybe fits more to Shlemazel. I think that's where it's rooted from. I didn't really look it up. I should. But Shlemazel is the guy that's getting this soup spilled on. Why is the soup always spilling on this certain individual? Why are they always in the wrong time at the wrong place? And is this a predestined thing again? No, it's not. It's part of life. And some of us, as I said, in certain areas, we end up being Shlemazolim. Maybe it's an area we shouldn't go to. We end up embarrassing ourselves. Now, I should point out that there are people who are not even aware that they may be a Shlemiel or Shlemazel. And does that make it sadder? Well, at least they're not so, they wouldn't be so sensitive to it because they're not aware. So we have to keep that in mind as well. But getting back to the Shlemazel, that type of loser, why is this? Now, I've had days where I feel like a total Shlemazel, when everything doesn't go right. Your computer's not turning on, so you bend over and ends up being the water spills over into your computer. And then, one thing leads to the next. When it rains, it pours. That type of experience. Now, usually we just laugh it off, let it pass. The next day will be a better day. So it's part of life, and sometimes some people get very, very nervous about it. I hope nobody has to go to therapy when they feel like a Shlemazel. And now someone says, I feel always like a Shlemazel every day. Well, that may be an issue. I would like to believe that nobody is a Shlemazel all the time. But remember, we also feed into our own self-image. And if you've been told that you're a Shlemazel long enough, and then you start convincing yourself, you become wired that way. The people suddenly always become the one that everyone picks on. So that's the Shlemazel in that joke, the Shlemazel. Now, Shlemiel and Shlemazel are sometimes interchangeable. But let's move over now to the Nudnik. The Nudnik is maybe the most intriguing one. Because some people are just nudges. I can't get to the bottom of it. I know myself when I'm in that type of mode, I try to understand, is it because you want to get attention? Is it because you're trying to gain information? We'll talk about a yente in future episodes. What exactly is this Nudnik about? And what is it? What drives this Nudnik? Like, what difference does it make what soup it was? No. Now, in a more serious note, sometimes when there are problems, I remember once I was in mid-England. They had a conference there, a Limud conference for a week. So they had a closed session addressing the future of the Jewish people, the crisis in education, and relevance, and commitment, and affiliation. And I was just sitting quietly. They asked me I said I don't really want to participate, but they wanted me to listen and maybe I have some input later. So I sat on the side. And they got into the arguments that Jews can get into, British especially. And I remember one guy came up with, people were talking about things, and one guy with a very heavy British accent says, "What's bloody wrong with all of you guys? You're talking here about rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic." It's a common expression. I couldn't stop laughing. Because we know the Titanic was sinking. Who cares about the deck chairs? It's like somebody suffering from a terminal illness and you were worried about acne on their nose. It reminds me of another joke. A guy's accused of murder, and his lawyer says, listen, they're going to have to check the crime scene, and you're going to have to take a blood test to see if your DNA matches. A few days pass, the lawyer calls his client and says, I've got bad news and good news. The bad news is your blood type matches the blood on the murder scene. And what's the good news, he says? The good news is you have low cholesterol. Okay. That borders on the irrelevant and like the pimple when you're dealing with a major thing. Deck chairs, when the whole boat is going down, the whole ship is going down. It's more the serious side of the Nudnik who's focused on completely trivial things. But there's far more to a Nudnik, as we know. The Nudnik just won't let go. In Yiddish, there's an expression like a nasa shmata. A nasa shmata is like a wet washcloth. It just sticks to you, and you just can't get rid of it. Some call it like a bad wart. And it has this type of attitude that, so when you're in a lighter mode, okay, someone's a Nudnik, fine. But when you're not in a lighter mode, it becomes very difficult. I remember my father telling me in his good old days, in his student years, they had a guy, his name, they call him Avram the Nudnik. Avram the Nudnik. Now, he remained a bachelor all of his life. But he would always come, he seemed like a lonely soul. I had met him a few times. Nice guy, but lonely soul, no one to speak to. So when he finally had someone to speak to, he didn't let go. I think there's a scene in a Woody Allen scene that's also similar to that. And my father told me one, but I don't know if it was a joke or it was serious, that this Avram the Nudnik would come speak to him or others, and they would try to avoid him. Like, I have time, I have no time. He says, if you don't listen to me now, I'm going to denude you your whole life. I'm going to nude you the rest of your life. It was like a threat. Extortion, blackmail. Now, if you know what a nudnik is like, again, sometimes you can tolerate some people, okay. But when you're not in a good mood, you don't want a nudnik around. Because a nudnik becomes like this nudging about what? And they don't stop. No, I feel, I remember when I was in school as younger kids, some people need attention. And they don't get it in a regular way. They become a nudnik. It's a way for them to insert themselves into the story. Is it a form of narcissism? I don't want to go to that extent, but it definitely has an element when you analyze it from a personality point of view of something is lacking. And I never did a scientific survey or scientific attempts or experiments. How can you give something to a nudnik that will make them less being a nudnik? Just like can you give something to a Shlemiel and Shlemazel? Well, that's part of why we're having this conversation. That's why I need you. Because I don't have it all figured out, to be honest. The topics I'm more familiar with. This I just felt is an excellent topic because it illuminates, it reveals to us different personality types. And not in the usual way. Usually we talk about narcissists, or we talk about bipolar, or we talk about ADD or ADHD. I'm addressing things more from that Yiddish angle, which is not so much a diagnosis of an individual type, but more of a behavioral type of thing. And I am very intrigued by it because it touches upon like looking at people and looking at society from yet another angle that you usually don't look at, which of course always is illuminating, always refreshing. You look at it, you ever see something, you look at it suddenly from a different angle, you say, wow, I never saw it from that perspective. And I think these words can help us. When you go back to the shtetl, Shalom Aleichem and other writers describing, so they were the classics. Remember, there people traveled, almost didn't travel. There was no technology. So who you knew for life, in most cases. And you lived in the town with them. And there was always the local Nudnik and the local Shlemiel and the local Shlemazel. That life is quite not that way today, especially in a more cosmopolitan and more urban environment. But still, people still have these qualities, still have these elements to it. I remember once being at an event, and I meet this guy. I know him for a long time, being a nudnik. I, in my work, try to be sensitive and kind to everybody, but you have to prioritize. People want to talk to you, but then there's some people they just won't let go. I remember once being at an event, a few people were waiting to speak to me about something, different people, and this person just would not let go. So I said to him, why don't you call me, take my number, and I was sincere, take my number and call me. And he just wouldn't let go. Sometimes in a class you have that. One person like hogs the whole picture. Now I don't always call that a nudnik. Some people are just not aware or not sensitive to others, and they just see things through their own lens. Others are extremely sensitive to those around them. But the nudnik part is really the nudging of it. And why is the nudge? Because is it going to resolve something? How many details do you need to know? And is it relevant and so on? So in the final analysis of it, at least in these type of characters, I would like to say that I think the Shlemiel, the Shlemazel and Nudnik is each one of us has an element of each one of them. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I, again, avoiding giving any real life examples because I don't want it to be in any way negative about any individual. So I could apply it all to myself. I have all three in different ways in different times, even though I don't think I'd categorize myself in any of these three ways. But then again, who do I know? We're subjective. But I think that looking at the quirks of our lives is fascinating because it's not quite always that area where we're in total denial and avoiding because it's painful or we were hurt. Some of these characteristics may not be due to some deeply embedded traumas, though not ruling that out. They sometimes just simply things we pick up and the way we live our lives. But on a concluding note, I would say the following. One thing that counters it all, since I come and I founded the Meaningful Life Center, when you have a meaningful life, when you have focus in your life and you know what the purpose of your life is, and that's in broad terms, you will understand that your life is to help another, is to serve, is to bring light into this world. Generally speaking, that focus, and if it's a single-minded, relentless focus, it generally weakens many of these quirky personality parts inside of us. Because at the end of the day, they're due to lack of that type of drive. Every person has something unique to contribute. Even the person that may be called by some as a Shlemiel, or the Shlemazel, or the Nudnik. Our goal is to focus on that. And sometimes our quirks can actually be harnessed and used in a good way. The people who are self-confident, but they could also be somewhat self-deprecating because they see some of their limits. We all have our limits. As I said before, some people are great in certain areas and not great in other areas. So it's good to be able to combine the both. On one hand, to know the focus of your life, and at the same time, to recognize the quirks you and others may have, and learn to laugh. Now, if you're married to one of these types, or at least in some areas one of these types, or you have friends or people that you're involved in, you can look at it as a source of sore point, a source of annoyance, or you can see it as something that maybe to be smiled at. Everybody has something that is going to be a quirky. Everybody has many qualities that are going to be very powerful. So at the end of the day, we love each other, and love is the driving force of how we look at each other. And even when you see that type of Shlemiel part, including yourself, that doesn't mean that you're dismissing the individual. It means that you're putting things into context. And it helps when it comes to understanding ourselves and others. Anyway, as usual, this is a experiment, and I'd love to hear your feedback, your thoughts. This has been Rabbi Jacobson talking about this Yiddish personality series. And I'm going to talk about other names and words and titles and categories. Love to hear your feedback, really would. Any thoughts you have, any ideas? I don't think this has been done out there really in this type of fashion. So maybe this can be something that can really help us understand each other, us be more sensitive to each other, and encompass the bizarre and the absurdity of life in so many different ways, the beauty and the absurdity of life. Everyone be well. Please share, please follow, please comment, feedback, all the different verbs out there to subscribe, and above all, be well and healthy, and be the best you can be. God bless you.